The sun was merciless in the Nevada desert, hanging low and hot like it had a personal grudge. Jonathan Crane stepped out of his Mustang, slamming the door harder than necessary. The car sputtered its last breath before dying completely. He kicked a rock off the shoulder of Highway 93, muttering curses that didn't fix engines. His phone had no service. His expensive watch told him he was late for a meeting that could make or break his fortune. And then, just when he thought the situation couldn't humiliate him further, a small voice cut through the silence. "Looks like she's overheating." Jonathan turned and blinked, half expecting a hallucination. A little girl, couldn't have been more than 10, stood beside his car. Her overalls were stained with grease, her hair tied in a messy ponytail, and her skin glistened with sweat and dust. She looked like she'd walked straight out of a garage and into a heat wave. "Excuse me?" Jonathan asked, blinking. "Your radiator's boiling. Pop the hood." Her voice had no doubt, no hesitation. Before he could respond, she reached out and pulled the latch herself. The hood creaked open like the mouth of a beast. She peered in like she'd seen it all before. Jonathan stared, dumbfounded. He should have stopped her. He should have told her this wasn't a joke. But instead, he watched. She dipped a cloth in her water bottle and pressed it against a valve, eyes scanning belts and wires like an old mechanic. "Where are your parents?" he asked, finally trying to recover authority. She ignored him. Then, as she reached deep into the engine, her sleeve lifted, and that's when he saw it. A large, ornate silver ring, glinting in the sun, far too big for her finger. The design, it looked disturbingly familiar. His heart skipped a beat. That ring, he had seen it before, years ago. The same jagged cut across the top, the same worn edges. It had belonged to someone he once knew, someone he hadn't dared think about in years. "Where did you get that ring?" he demanded, stepping closer. The girl didn't flinch. She looked up slowly, her eyes dark and steady. "It was my mother's," she said, just like that. No emotion, no explanation. Jonathan staggered back a step as if the desert had punched him in the gut. "Your mother?" he repeated. "What was her name?" The girl shrugged. "You wouldn't believe me." She turned back to the engine, jiggling a hose like she knew exactly what she was doing. Jonathan's mouth went dry. Everything in him screamed this wasn't a coincidence. That ring wasn't a common piece. It had been custom-made, gifted by him long ago to a woman named Maya, a woman who vanished without a trace. And now here it was, on this girl's hand, on this stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. He crouched beside her, voice softer. "Look, I need to know who gave you that ring." She stopped what she was doing, looked him dead in the eyes. "I told you, my mom. She said if someone ever asked, to say her name was Maya." The name hit him like a hammer. For a moment he didn't speak. He just stared at her, every thought unraveling. Maya, it couldn't be. But it was. The child had her eyes. Her voice was different, but her calm, her certainty, was hauntingly familiar. And if she was telling the truth, that meant... Jonathan stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Where do you live?" he asked. She shrugged again. "Around. Sometimes here, sometimes there." That made no sense. No child should be out here alone. And yet, she didn't seem scared. She seemed like she was exactly where she needed to be. "Does anyone know you're out here?" he asked. "Nope," she said casually, "but someone's always watching." Her words were cryptic, strange, but they made Jonathan feel something he hadn't felt in years. Unease. Not fear. Not yet. But something was wrong, and he knew it. The car hissed, releasing steam. She shut. "The hood. You'll need a new belt," she said. "But you can drive another 5 miles before it goes again. There's a mechanic at exit 14. He owes my mom." Jonathan's jaw clenched. How did she know all this? He checked his phone again. Still no service. "Can I give you a ride?" he asked. She laughed, not cruelly, but like she knew something he didn't. "You already are," she said, and before he could question what that meant, she walked around to the passenger side and climbed in. Jonathan hesitated only a moment before joining her. As they drove, His mind raced. There was no explanation that made sense, and yet one possibility loomed large and terrifying. This girl might be his daughter. The thought was absurd, impossible, but the pieces were aligning in ways he couldn't ignore. The ring, the name, the eyes. He looked at her as she stared ahead calmly, dirt on her cheek, hands folded in her lap. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zoe," she said. "Zoe Maya." He almost swerved off the road. They drove in silence. Zoe didn't ask questions. She didn't act impressed by the leather seats or the dashboard tech. She seemed focused, like she was leading him somewhere. Jonathan had the sinking, feeling he wasn't in control anymore. This wasn't just a broken-down car. This was the start of something else. Something buried, something coming to the surface, one wrench turn at a time. And deep down, he knew his life was about to change, forever. Jonathan drove in silence, both hands clenched around the steering wheel. The Mustang's engine hummed softly now, no longer sputtering or stalling, but the tension inside the car felt like it could explode at any moment. Zoe sat beside him, her small frame calm, her gaze fixed on the endless highway. Ahead, she wasn't playing with anything, wasn't humming, wasn't curious about the car's fancy dashboard. She just stared forward, completely at peace with the desert around them, like she belonged to this stretch of forgotten land. Jonathan glanced at her again, heart pounding as his eyes settled on the ring glinting on her finger. He had given that exact ring to Maya 2 decades ago, a silver band with a jagged crest inlaid, one of a kind, designed with a symbol only the two of them understood. It had vanished the day she did. Seeing it now, on the finger of a child who said her mother's name, was Maya, made every bone in his body ache with disbelief. It wasn't possible, except it was right in front of him. He tried to ask again, softer this time. "Zoe, can you tell me more about your mom?" His voice cracked just slightly at the end, and he hated how vulnerable it made him feel. Zoe didn't answer immediately. She reached out, touched the ring with her thumb, like it was a memory she didn't want to disturb. Finally, she said never to talk about her unless someone really cared. Jonathan swallowed hard, unsure what that meant. "I do care. I knew her once, a long time ago." Zoe turned her head slightly, not enough to meet his eyes, but enough for him to see the edge of a frown. "Then why did you leave?" she asked. The words hit him like a hammer. His breath caught. She wasn't supposed to know that. She couldn't know that. But the question was there now, floating in the air. Between them, impossible to ignore. The rest of the drive to exit 14 stretched out painfully. The sun shifted in the sky, casting long shadows over the road, as if even the daylight was retreating from the conversation that loomed. Jonathan's thoughts ran like a broken film reel, snapshots of Maya, the fights with his father, the day she walked away from his life and never came back. He had told himself for years that it was her choice, that she wanted nothing more to do with him or the life he represented. But now, with every second Zoe spent in silence beside him, that story started to unravel. He had questions, so many questions, but none of them felt safe to ask. Not yet. Not until he understood what kind of world Zoe had grown up in. When they finally pulled up to the auto shop, Jonathan's hands were shaking. The mechanic's shop looked like a relic from another time. Metal siding, rusted at the corners, the roof sagging, a yard full of gutted cars and forgotten parts. Zoe stepped out before he could even shut the engine off. She walked like she knew the place, like she'd been here before, like it was home. A tall, grizzled man stood near the garage door, wiping grease from his hands. His eyes narrowed the second he saw her. "Zoe?" he asked. His voice was rough but startled. She nodded. "Hey, Frank." The man turned to Jonathan next, giving him a hard stare that spoke volumes. "Who's this?" "His car broke down," she said flatly. "I helped him." Frank grunted, glanced at The Mustang then motioned toward the garage. "Pull it in, we'll take a look." Inside the garage, the air was thick with engine fumes, dust, and something heavier, something unsaid. Jonathan felt it the second he stepped in. The walls were lined with tools, many of them older than Zoe. There was a photo tacked above the workbench, half-torn, sun-faded, but unmistakably Maya. Jonathan stared at it, unable to speak. Frank noticed. "You know her." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I knew her a long time ago. We were close. Then she disappeared." Frank's jaw tightened. "She didn't disappear. She was erased." The sentence froze Jonathan in place. "What do you mean?" he asked. Frank didn't answer right away. He walked over to a cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a shoebox layered in grime. "She left this," he said. "Didn't want to throw it out." Jonathan opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were a few old receipts, some loose photos, a broken watch, and a folded piece of paper. He opened it, revealing a handwritten letter, unfinished, torn at the bottom. The handwriting was undeniably Maya's. "If you found this, then you know I tried. I wanted to tell the truth, but there were people who wouldn't let me. They said it would ruin everything." Jonathan read the words over and over again. The letter cut off mid-sentence. There was no signature. His throat went dry. It felt like a piece of his past had just clawed its way back from the dead, still bleeding. Zoe stood near the door, watching everything. "She said you were the only person who ever made her feel safe," she said quietly. "But you didn't fight for her." Jonathan turned toward her, shocked. "I didn't know," he began, but the excuse sounded hollow even to him. Zoe nodded as if she expected that answer. "She said they would say that no one would admit what really happened." Jonathan felt like he was drowning. He looked at Frank. "Who did this to her?" Frank shook his head slowly. "It's not just one person. It was a whole system. Your father, his lawyers, maybe even the police. They didn't want her around anymore, and they made sure of it." Everything in Jonathan's chest tightened. He thought he had left that world behind. The lies, the manipulation, the power his family wielded like a weapon, but it was still alive, still infecting everything it touched. And now he was staring into the face of the child that world had tried to bury, his child. "Zoe," he said slowly, "I didn't know, but I'm here now, and I need to understand everything." She looked at him for the first time with something that resembled vulnerability. "Then you better be ready for what you find," she said, "because some people don't want the past to come back." They left the shop without another word. The Mustang rumbled back onto the road. Zoe didn't say much after that, but something had shifted. Her shoulders weren't quite as stiff. Her eyes, though still guarded, weren't completely closed off. Jonathan knew. They had crossed a line. There was no going back now. What started as a breakdown in the desert was now a doorway into everything he thought was buried. And Zoe, with her quiet strength and that damned ring, was the only key that could open it. As the highway stretched ahead, the sun now lower in. The sky, Jonathan knew this was no longer about fixing a car. It was about fixing something much deeper. Something broken between him and a life he never realized he had left behind. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded with pain, with history, with unfinished stories that demanded to be told. And whether he was ready or not, they were coming fast. Jonathan Crane's world, before Zoe, was defined by control. He lived in a high-rise overlooking the city, windows so clean they made the skyline look like a painting, furniture arranged with the kind of precision only someone obsessed with order could maintain. He owned 5 watches, all expensive, each set to the exact second. His mornings began at 5 a.m. sharp, workout, black coffee, one news outlet, then silence. No distractions, no clutter. His schedule was airtight. Clients called him relentless. Investors called him unshakable. But none of them knew the truth. His obsession with Control was a shield built out of guilt, shaped by something he never spoke about, something he buried years ago in a past that still pulsed quietly underneath. On the surface, Jonathan had it all: money, power, recognition. He walked into rooms and made things happen. If something broke, he replaced it. If something failed, he fired it. People didn't ask questions. They followed. But in the rare moments when no one was watching, when the condo lights were off and the city was asleep, he would sometimes walk into the spare room. It had no furniture, just a box tucked in the corner. Inside the box were old pictures, a leather bracelet, a letter he never mailed, and a sketch Maya once made of a car engine with a heart drawn in the corner. He hadn't opened that box in years, but he hadn't thrown it away either. He told himself it was meaningless, just leftovers from a phase, but he knew better. That room was the only place he ever allowed the past to breathe. Maya had been unlike anyone he'd ever met. She didn't care about wealth or reputation. She loved machines, got her hands dirty, talked to engines like they were old friends. She worked for his father's garage when Jonathan was fresh out of business school, too clean-cut and proud to notice her at first. But she noticed him, not the polished surface, but something under it. And for a while, he let her see it. They spent nights under cars, not at parties. She laughed at his suits. He brought her takeout from places she couldn't afford. There was a fire between them and a peace he never found again, until it all burned down. His father had called Maya a phase. He'd warned Jonathan that people like her were dangerous, that they didn't understand legacy or responsibility. The tension had grown. Rumors spread. When Maya got pregnant, Jonathan didn't know until it was too late. One night she was there, curled up in his jacket in the shop's back office. The next morning, she was gone. No call, no note, just silence. His father said she moved on. The workers stayed quiet. The garage changed hands. Jonathan didn't ask questions, because deep down he didn't want to know what they would tell him, and so he buried it. He buried Maya in work, buried regret in real estate deals and offshore accounts. He told himself she left by choice, that if she wanted him to be part of her life, she would have stayed. But now, with Zoe in the passenger seat, wearing that ring, speaking that name with such certainty, everything he believed about the past was turning to ash. He hadn't walked away clean. He'd been pushed. Or maybe worse, he stood by while she was erased. That box in the spare room hadn't just held memories. It held evidence of cowardice, of silence, of the kind of man he swore he wasn't. In meetings, he wore confidence like a suit, but now he could feel the seams unraveling. After Zoe, the numbers didn't matter. The merger waiting on his desk felt like a joke. The meetings, the transactions, the suits, they all seemed like props in a show he no longer believed in. Something had cracked inside him. The thought of Maya being silenced, of her raising Zoe alone or worse, of her suffering while he lived in glass towers, it made him sick. And yet the truth hadn't fully landed. Not yet. He was still bracing for impact. He began to wonder, if Zoe hadn't found him, would he ever have gone looking? Would he have driven past the ghost towns, stopped at the shop, opened the box? Or would he have gone on pretending Maya was just a name from a past life? The guilt curled in his stomach. Zoe didn't ask for this. She didn't chase him. She just happened to be there, fixing a car, carrying a ring, speaking a name that had the power to tear down the walls he built for decades. She didn't want anything from him, but somehow that made it worse. Jonathan stood in his condo that night after they parted ways. Zoe had insisted on being dropped off near an old bus station. "I'm used to getting around," she had said. He let her go, but it didn't feel right. He kept seeing her face, so calm, so matter-of-fact, so burdened. He walked into the spare room, opened the box, stared at the sketch again. Maya had written something on the back in pen. "The ones who build are the ones who break. Be careful what you fix." It wasn't a warning. It was a truth she had lived and maybe died by. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. Every tick of the clock was another question. How had Maya survived without support? Who helped her? Who hurt her? And why did no one talk about it? There were too many gaps, too many convenient silences. He wasn't just looking for Maya anymore. He was looking for the truth about his own family, about the people he trusted, about himself. And the more he looked back, the more he realized this story didn't start with a broken car. It started long before, with one decision, one silence, one lie. As the sun rose over the city, Jonathan made a decision. He would find out what happened. He would stop pretending the past was buried. Zoe was more than a stranger with a familiar ring. She was a message, one the universe had delivered with precision. And now that he had heard it, he couldn't unhear it. He would find Maya, or find what was left of her. He would uncover what his father buried, even if it destroyed everything, because somewhere deep in the life he had built, something had been missing, and her name was Maya. The first time Jonathan saw Zoe again, it wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. There was no soundtrack playing in his head. It was early morning, barely 6:30 a.m., and he was driving through an industrial part of the city, an area he usually avoided. But that day, he had taken a different route. He told himself it was just traffic, but something inside him had been restless since their first encounter. She had given him no number, no address, no promise, just her name, Zoe Maya. He told himself he'd move on, that it wasn't his place. But then he saw her, walking alone down a street with no sidewalk, carrying a plastic toolbox and a half-eaten banana, her small frame barely visible in the morning fog. He pulled over without thinking. She didn't flinch. She looked at him through the open window like she'd been expecting him. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "Heading to a job," she said plainly. "There's a guy 2 blocks down whose truck won't start. I promised I'd help." Jonathan stared. "How do you even know that?" She shrugged. "I hear things." He asked around. "I said yes." Jonathan looked around. There were no homes nearby. No kids her age, no adults looking after her. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked. She hesitated just for a second, long enough. "With a friend," she said. "Don't worry about me." But he did, more than he wanted to admit. That moment, her pause, her eyes darting slightly, the chill in her voice, it was the first time he realized something was deeply off, not just with her story, but with the way the world was treating her. She wasn't a girl with a family or a support system. She was a ghost walking in plain sight. Jonathan felt a weight in his chest he couldn't ignore. "Let me take you to school," he said, trying to anchor the moment. "To something normal." She looked at him like he'd said a joke. "School?" she repeated. "You think I've got time for that?" There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. That scared him more than anything. Jonathan followed her quietly, unable to leave. She led him to a mechanic's garage built into the back of a gas station. The owner, a gray-haired man named Leo, looked at Jonathan with suspicion. "You her dad?" he asked, wiping oil off his palms. Jonathan opened his mouth but said nothing. Zoe answered for him. "No, he's just a guy." Leo nodded like that made more sense. "Zoe's solid," he said. "Smart, quick hands, better than half the punks I've hired." Jonathan asked, "You pay her?" Leo frowned. "I feed her. She takes what she wants from the tips jar." It wasn't a job, it was survival. And suddenly, everything Jonathan thought he knew about helping someone felt small. After Zoe finished working, she came back out with grease on her arms and a sandwich in hand. "You still here?" she asked. He nodded. "I want to talk." "We already did," she said. "You found the ring. You heard the name. Isn't that enough?" Jonathan stepped closer, voice low. "I think there's more to this. I think something happened to your mother, something bad. I need to understand what it was." Zoe didn't move. She chewed slowly. "You're late then. Everyone else already forgot." That line struck him hard. The world had moved on from Maya, but this girl hadn't. She carried the silence like a second skin. He couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Zoe's eyes, the absence of fear, the exhaustion of someone who had grown up expecting nothing. He dug out the letter from Maya again, trying to make sense of what little was left. The warning it held, the implication that someone wanted her quiet. He ran a search for any police reports, missing persons files, court records. Nothing, like she had been erased. He called in a favor with a private investigator he trusted. "Find everything you can about a woman named Maya," he said. "No last name. She worked for my family's garage about 10 years ago. She had a daughter. Maybe she went missing." There was silence on the other end. Then, "That's not much to go on. You sure this isn't personal?" Jonathan closed his eyes. "It's more than that." The next morning, the investigator called back. "You're right," he said. "Something's wrong. I found a payroll file from the old garage. Maya's name was on it. But 2 months later, everything vanishes. No resignation, no termination, just erased. No medical records, no driver's license renewal, no social media. She didn't move. She disappeared. And I mean scrubbed." Jonathan felt sick. "Who has the power to do that?" he asked. "Your family," the man replied, "or someone working for them." Jonathan hung up without another word. He stood at the window of his condo for a long time, watching the city move beneath him. And for the first time, he wasn't proud of what he saw. He was afraid of it. He decided to visit the old garage, even though it had changed ownership years ago. The place still reeked of motor oil and history. He walked through it slowly, like a man retracing his sins. Some of the old walls were still there. He remembered where Maya used to keep her tools, where they would sneak lunch, where he told her he would protect her. There was nothing left now, just strangers, blank stares, and new names on lockers. But he found something. Behind a loose panel in the back room, a photograph taped to the drywall. Faded, water-damaged, but Maya's face was unmistakable. And next to her, a blurred figure. Not Jonathan, not Zoe, someone else. Male, watching, smiling, like he knew. Jonathan left the shop with shaking hands. He drove for hours without direction. The image haunted him. Who was that man? Why was that photo hidden? Why did no one ask questions when Maya vanished? The walls were closing in, and the one person who might hold the truth was a girl, too used to being ignored. But he couldn't ignore her anymore. That ring, that name, that pause when he asked where she slept. These weren't coincidences. They were fractures in a story he had let others write for him. And now, for the first time in years, he was ready to tear the whole thing apart. Jonathan didn't waste time. After seeing that photograph hidden behind the garage panel, something had snapped inside him. The vague suspicions, the half-truths, the emotional fog, it all solidified into one undeniable fact. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make Maya disappear. And now that Zoe had shown up, wearing her ring, carrying her memory, Jonathan couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. He needed answers. He needed them now. The first thing he did was contact a lawyer he trusted, Miriam Polk, a former prosecutor turned private legal investigator. They met in her cramped office, downtown, surrounded by boxes of open cases and cold files. "This isn't a case," he told her. "It's a cover-up." Miriam leaned back, unimpressed. "People say that every day. You're gonna need more than a ring and a gut feeling." Jonathan dropped the photograph on her desk. "Look at her face, look. His." Miriam studied it, her eyes narrowing. "You think she was being watched? I think she was being followed," Jonathan replied, maybe threatened. "And then someone made her vanish without a trace." Miriam sighed. "You know how this works. You don't just erase someone unless you've got power. Connections and a reason." Jonathan nodded. "My father owned the garage. My family had that kind of reach." Miriam looked at him. "And you're just realizing this now?" Jonathan swallowed the guilt. "I didn't ask questions back then." They filed a motion for any sealed employment records, private HR, documents and business correspondence linked to Maya's tenure at Crane Automotive. Jonathan used his name to get access, But even with legal force, a lot of the records had accidentally been purged. Deleted emails, redacted memos, missing logbooks. It was more than sloppy. It was coordinated. Miriam looked him in the eye. Someone wanted this buried deep. Either she knew something, or she became a liability. That word, liability, made his skin crawl. Maya wasn't a threat. She was a mechanic, a mother, a woman who trusted him, and he'd done nothing to stop what came for her. In parallel, Jonathan began spending more time with Zoe, not because she invited him in, she didn't, but because she tolerated him. Sometimes, he'd show up near the garage, buy her lunch, sit quietly as she worked. He didn't push, he didn't pry, he just stayed present. And slowly, she softened. One afternoon, while adjusting a carburetor with oil-streaked fingers, she muttered without looking at him, "You know she used to cry in that office." After work, when no one was around. Jonathan froze. "She told you that?" Zoe nodded. "Said the job was fine. It was the way people looked at her that wasn't." The more he heard, the more ashamed he became. He'd been there. He remembered the side eyes, the whispered judgments. Maya was the only woman on that crew, the only black mechanic, the only one who didn't drink with the boys after hours. He thought she was strong enough to take it, but strength doesn't mean safety. And now he saw how dangerous his silence had been. Zoe handed him a folded receipt one day. No explanation. Just gave it to him and walked off. He unfolded it. A gas station stub dated 2 weeks after Maya vanished. Scribbled on the back, in Maya's handwriting, "If I don't come back, look in the safe, 1287. You know the rest." Jonathan stared at the numbers for hours. 1287. It was a code they used when they were younger. The street number of her childhood house, the one she swore she'd never return to. She used it for everything. Locker combos, passwords, even the time they programmed into the radio presets. He drove to the old garage that night, using Zoe's note like a compass. The office was locked. He used a crowbar. No alarms went off. No one came. Inside, the place was stripped bare. No files, no computers. But he found the old safe behind a panel in the wall. Same one they used for cash deposits. The dial was dusty, stiff. He turned it slowly. 12, 8, 7. Click. Inside was a plastic folder and a flash drive. The folder contained contracts, signed NDAs, and one medical form. Positive pregnancy confirmation from over a decade ago. Maya's name, no father listed. The flash drive was encrypted. He took it to Miriam. She cracked it. Inside were voice memos, Maya's voice. Shaky, tired, desperate. "They said I'd ruin his name if I stayed. That they'd make sure no one would hire me. That I should leave while I still could. I don't even know if this will make it to him. But if it does, Jonathan, I never wanted to disappear. They forced me." He played the recording 5 times. Each time his face burned hotter, his jaw clenched tighter. Maya had tried. She'd tried to leave breadcrumbs, but no one wanted to follow them. Jonathan stood in Miriam's office with fists balled. "This isn't just a cover-up," he said. "It's coercion. It's abuse." Miriam nodded slowly. "You're not wrong, but be ready. If you go after them, they'll come for you too." Jonathan looked her in the eye. Then let them, because now it wasn't about guilt. It was about justice. That night, he drove Zoe home, or at least where she said was home, an abandoned apartment complex on the edge of the city. "You sleep here?" he asked. She shrugged. "Sometimes. It's quiet." He stared at the building's boarded windows, the graffiti, the sagging roof. "You don't have to," he said. "I have a place. You could stay there, just for a while." Zoe looked at him long and hard. "I don't need saving," she said. "You're not the first one to offer, but you might be the first one to mean it." She turned and disappeared into the building. Jonathan stood there for a long time, watching the dark swallow her whole. The folder burned a hole in Jonathan's briefcase. He hadn't opened it again since retrieving it from the old safe, but he could feel it with him, like it pulsed with weight, like it could sink his entire world if anyone else saw it. Inside were pages Maya never intended for strangers. Medical, documents, scanned contracts, employee warnings, and one damning photo. A man shaking hands with his father, both grinning while Maya stood in the background, face turned, blurred. She wasn't meant to be the focus, but she was the reason the image made Jonathan sick. She looked like a ghost. Already, present but vanishing, forgotten on purpose. He sat in Miriam's office again, but this time his hands were still. The rage had stopped boiling. Now it simmered, focused. "This document here," Miriam said, tapping a typed memo, "it's an internal note from your father's legal advisor. It states Maya posed a potential PR risk and that measures were being discussed for quiet offboarding. That's not standard HR language, that's coded dismissal." Jonathan didn't look up. "It's a cover-up." "It's more than that," Miriam said. "It's premeditated isolation. They made her disappear before anyone could ask why." She slid another paper toward him, an unsigned legal agreement offering Maya a large sum for personal relocation and silence. No signature, no date, just one set of initials in the margin, his father's. Jonathan clenched his jaw. His father had always been strategic, ruthless even. But this wasn't strategy. This was erasure. And now Zoe was living with the consequences, squatting in half-collapsed buildings, fixing strangers' cars for cash, because someone had decided her mother wasn't worth protecting. "She never took the money," Jonathan said quietly. He couldn't be bought. That's what cost her." Miriam nodded. "And now it could cost you too." Jonathan looked at her. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the file. "If this leaks, your father's company implodes. Maybe yours too. You sure you want that?" He didn't hesitate. "If this is what our name was built on, it deserves to burn." Later that night, he played the voice recording again. Maya's voice, soft, tired. The part that hit hardest wasn't the fear. It was the clarity. She wasn't confused. She wasn't begging. She was simply stating what she'd been told. "They said no one would believe me. That Jonathan was too clean, too protected, that I'd look bitter, emotional, desperate, that it wouldn't matter." Jonathan turned it off, not because he couldn't hear it, but because he already had. Over and over. Her words had carved themselves into him like a scar. He returned to the garage once more, hoping to find someone, anyone, who remembered. But most of the faces had changed. The foreman now was a younger man named Dave, who'd only been around the last few years. "Maya," he said, scratching his chin. "Name sounds familiar. Didn't she used to hang around with you?" Jonathan nodded. "She worked here. She was good, quiet. We didn't talk much." Dave shrugged. "Boss didn't like us getting too friendly with the girls. Said it made things messy." Jonathan's stomach twisted. "What boss?" Dave laughed. "Yours, I guess. The old man." Jonathan left without another word. He had enough now to fill a courtroom and a grave. He drove straight to Zoe. She was sitting on the curb outside a laundromat, sorting bolts in a shoebox. When he pulled up, she didn't smile, didn't stand, just looked at him like she already knew. He sat beside her on the concrete. "I found it," he said. She kept organizing. "Found what?" "A file from the old garage. Maya left it behind. She was trying to tell me something before she vanished." Zoe nodded slowly. "She always said, truth doesn't disappear. It just hides until someone looks hard enough." Jonathan swallowed. She was right. He took out a printed copy of the unsigned agreement and handed it to her. This was their offer. She didn't sign it. She paid for that. Zoe stared at the paper for a long time. Then she folded it in half and tucked it into her coat. "They thought she was weak," she said, "but she just wasn't cruel enough to fight them the way they fight people." Jonathan looked at her, eyes stinging. "She wasn't weak. She was the strongest person I've ever known." "Then why didn't you protect her?" Zoe asked. Not accusatory, just tired. He didn't answer. There wasn't one that made it okay. She stood. "You can drop me at the lot. I got a job." "Zoe," he said, "you don't have to do this alone." She looked back at him. "I've always done it alone." He drove her, but the silence this time wasn't cold. It was something else. Acknowledgement maybe, or mourning. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask for it as she stepped. Out he reached into his coat and handed her a photo, Maya's scan from the file, smiling and very pregnant. Zoe took it with both hands. Her fingers shook just slightly. "I never saw one of these," she whispered. "Not like this." "She was proud," Jonathan said. "You should know that. She never stopped fighting. Not once." Zoe nodded. Then, before turning away, she said, "They thought if she disappeared, I would too. But I'm still here." Jonathan drove home and poured himself a drink. Not to forget, but to steady. He stood at the window again, staring at the skyline that used to mean success. Now it looked like scaffolding built on silence. Maya's file sat on his kitchen counter, open, untouched, since he showed it to Zoe. He didn't need to read it again. It was carved into his brain. But there was something else. A letter, handwritten, folded and taped to the last page. He hadn't seen it before. He unfolded it slowly. It read, "If you ever read this, don't look for revenge. Look for her. She'll need you, and she won't ask." Signed, M. He read it twice, then closed the file. Not out of respect, but preparation. The truth wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Maya had left him. A task, protect the girl. And now that the lies were exposed, he knew what was coming next. Pushback, anger, retaliation. Zoe was still in danger, and he'd be damned if he lost her too. The file had opened a door Jonathan couldn't close, but it wasn't just what was in it, it was what it implied. There were signatures, threats, and documents crafted to silence Maya, but there was something else tucked between the pages. A list, names, not just hers, 3 others, all female, all employees of Crane Automotive. All left the company under mutual agreement, according to the language in the exit documents. But there were no job transfers, no new resumes, no digital footprints. They vanished, just like Maya. Jonathan stared at the names for an hour. Tanya Brooks, Lila Garver, Selena Moore. None rang a bell, but the pattern was too clear. Maya wasn't alone. She was one of many. He drove to the old HR building the next morning. It was now leased by another company, but he recognized the layout. The file room hadn't changed. Using an old key he wasn't sure would still work. He entered quietly, heart pounding. The cabinets were labeled by year. He pulled 2013, 2014, 2015, skimmed names, and there they were. Tanya, Lila, Selena, all listed as terminated for performance with matching file stamps. But no details, no warnings, no complaints, no appeals, just single sheet. Printouts with no signatures. That wasn't how the company operated. Not then, not ever. Someone had wiped the record clean and replaced it with a lie. Back in his car, Jonathan called Miriam. "There are others," he said. "I've got names." He read them out. She was quiet. "You think they're alive?" "I don't know," he said. "But if they are, they're hiding or silenced." She took a breath. "This is bigger than we thought." Jonathan already knew, and that knowledge wasn't empowering. It was terrifying, because the deeper he dug, the more resistance he felt. Emails bounced back, numbers disconnected, and when he called one address listed for Lila Garver, the man who answered said, "Don't call again," and hung up. 10 minutes later, his phone pinged with a location access alert. Someone was tracking him. That night, Jonathan got home to find his apartment door slightly open. He stepped in slow. Nothing was missing, but something was wrong. His desk drawer, where he had left the original copy of Maya's folder, was open. Papers were untouched, but shifted, like someone had searched them and put them back. But they missed one thing. A voice memo he recorded of Zoe telling her story, buried inside a voice recorder he always kept charged. It was gone, not the flash drive, not the printed documents. That specific voice, that story, targeted, erased. The message was clear. Someone was watching, and they knew exactly what mattered most. He didn't tell Zoe right away. She was already carrying too much, but the next time he saw her, he noticed something off. She had a scrape on her arm, fresh, bandaged hastily. "What happened?" he asked. She looked away. "Nothing. Zoe, just some idiot who didn't want to pay me," she muttered. "It's fine." It wasn't. She had been cornered. Jonathan could see it in her eyes. Something had shifted. She wasn't scared. She was preparing. Like she had been here before. Like this wasn't the first time survival had demanded silence. He made a choice that night. He moved Zoe into his apartment. She resisted, cursed, nearly walked out. But when he showed her the tampered drawer, her face changed. "They want me gone too," she said. "Same as her." Jonathan nodded. "They don't get to win twice." He turned the guest room into a space for her. Bare walls, clean sheets, food in the fridge. It wasn't much, but it was the first real safety she'd had in years. That night, she didn't say thank you. She just locked the door and slept for 10 straight hours. No movement, no sounds, like her body was finally allowed to stop fighting. The next day, Miriam called. "We have a hit. Tanya Brooks filed a sealed complaint in 2013 against the company. Sexual harassment, retaliation, hostile work environment. It was buried fast. No payout, no follow-up." "Where is she now?" Jonathan asked. Last known address was Arizona. Nothing after that. But get this. Her file was accessed 3 weeks ago by someone inside Crane Automotive. Jonathan felt the floor shift beneath him. "They're cleaning house," Miriam said. "They know you're digging." And worse, maybe they knew how close he was to blowing it all wide open. Zoe started noticing the same man near the apartment lobby, twice in 1 week. She didn't panic. She followed him. She was quiet, fast, invisible, trained by necessity. She got a photo, grainy but clear. Jonathan ran it through a contact at a private security firm. The man was ex-military, now a contractor for a company that handled internal problems for elite clients. He was paid by a shell corporation linked to Grain Global, Jonathan's own family's umbrella group. "Your people are paying to watch your life fall apart," Miriam said. "How poetic." Jonathan stared at the photo. "Then it's time I gave them something to really watch." He went to the press. Not publicly, not yet. He met with a reporter from a local outlet known for deep investigations. Gave her the names, the timeline, the documents Maya had left. "We're not ready to publish," she said, "but we'll keep looking." "No," Jonathan said. "We publish, with or without you, because the more we wait, the more women vanish." Zoe stood behind him. As he said it, silent, still, a shadow holding fire. She didn't say anything, but later in the elevator she whispered, "If they come, we don't run, we expose." Jonathan hadn't visited the old Crane estate in nearly 5 years, not since the last board meeting where his father, pale and declining, handed the operational keys to Derek without a word to Jonathan. The house looked the same. Perfect hedges, stoic statues, a kind of wealth that didn't invite. Warmth. But Jonathan wasn't here for memories. He was here for answers. In his hand, he held the proof. Documents showing internal authorizations, company memos, and signed agreements pointing not to his father, but to Derek. The betrayal was complete. He had assumed their father was the hand behind Maya's disappearance, but it was Derek who signed the final decisions. Derek who funded the private security firms. Derek who had marked Maya as a liability. The door opened before he could knock. Derek stood in the hallway like he had been waiting for a storm. They sat in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of old wood. Derek poured whiskey into 2 glasses as if they were brothers reconnecting, not adversaries about to clash over buried lives. "You always were dramatic," Derek said with a faint smile. Jonathan didn't respond. He laid the papers out on the desk one by one. Derek studied them, slow and deliberate. "You don't understand what this would have done to the family if it had come out," Derek said finally. "Maya wasn't just inconvenient. She was dangerous." Jonathan's voice was low but sharp. "She was a person. You had her followed. You threatened her. You made her vanish." Derek's expression didn't change. She refused help. She escalated. She put herself in danger. We contained it. Jonathan's hands trembled. He wanted to shout, to grab his brother by the collar and demand remorse, but Derek didn't offer any. "She had your child," Jonathan said, "and you knew." Derek's silence was the answer. He'd known the whole time. Maya had been pregnant. Zoe was living proof, and he had done nothing. No, worse. He had helped make sure no one else ever found out. "You erased her," Jonathan said. "You erased them both." Derek stood and walked to the window, swirling the glass in his hand. "We protected the company. That's what we do." Jonathan's voice cracked. "That's what you do. I was gone, but you were here. You could have helped her." Derek finally turned. "Help her how? You really think Maya wanted to be rescued? She was proud, stubborn, she going to go public. She was going to ruin everything Father built." Jonathan stepped forward. "Then it deserved to be ruined." The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek blinked, maybe the first real crack in his confidence. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious." Derek shook his head. "This will destroy our name. Then we'll start over." "You're willing to do that? For a girl who doesn't even want your name?" That hit like a punch. But Jonathan stood firm. "She doesn't want my name. She wants the truth, and I owe her that." Derek finished his drink. "You go public with this. You're not just ruining the company. You're starting a war." Jonathan walked to the door. "Then I hope you're ready to lose." Back at the apartment, Zoe was waiting. She didn't sit. She paced, eyes flicking toward the window every few seconds. She already knew. She could feel it in the air. "You talk to him," she said. Jonathan nodded. "It was him. He signed everything." "And now? Now we go forward." Zoe stopped. "That easy?" "No, not even close." He showed her the files. She read them slowly, like someone flipping through a book of old wounds. Her hands didn't shake, but her voice did. "He called me a threat?" Jonathan nodded. "And a mistake." She looked up. "You think he's right?" Jonathan met her eyes. "I think you're the only thing in this family that isn't." The next morning, Jonathan held a press meeting. Not flashy, not dramatic. A single podium, a single reporter, Mia. The story went live an hour later. The Crane legacy, hidden abuse, silenced voices, and the woman who fought alone. Inside were interviews, documents, audio files, a picture of Maya taken from the garage photo, and one of Zoe standing outside the old shop, arms crossed, face strong. It went viral. Within hours, comments flooded in, former employees, anonymous confessions. The silence had broken, and the Crane name was now poison. But the war had only begun. That night the apartment was broken into. Not subtle. Glass shattered. Zoe, locked in the bathroom, heard the footsteps, the drawers opening. Jonathan got home in time to see a figure sprint from the hallway. He chased down 2 blocks, almost caught him, but the man jumped a fence and disappeared. When he returned, Zoe was crouched in the dark, a kitchen knife in her hand. "It's starting," she said. "They're not going to stop." Jonathan nodded. "Then we don't stop either." He checked the drawers. Nothing stolen except one thing, a copy of the reporter's backup USB. The people behind this didn't want money. They wanted the story erased. Zoe didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. They took turns watching the door. Jonathan called Miriam, voice tight. "We need protection, real protection." She agreed. Sent 2 retired officers she trusted to stay nearby. But it wasn't enough. The Crane name had pulled the spotlight, and now the whole world was watching what Jonathan would do next. Zoe sat with her legs folded on the couch, staring at nothing. "They think we'll run," she said. "We always ran. My mom ran. I ran." Jonathan reached out and held her wrist gently. "Then we changed the pattern." "How?" she whispered. "By standing still," he said, "and letting them come." That week, anonymous threats hit his email. News outlets called non-stop. Derek issued a statement denying everything, claimed Jonathan had gone rogue, accused Zoe of manipulation, of faking the ring, of fabricating the voice recordings. But it didn't stick. People had seen enough. And when another former Crane employee came forward, an older woman, named Selena Moore, the dam cracked wide open. "She was next," Selena said, but Maya warned her, told her to get out, said they were going to make her disappear. I didn't believe her. Not until now. For Zoe, the betrayal wasn't just about Derek or the company. It was about the world that allowed men like Derek to bury women like Maya. And worse, it was about the people who looked away. "They always say the truth wins," she told Jonathan. "But it only wins if someone's left to tell it." He looked at her. "You're here, and I'm here. That's enough for now." She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and turned her gaze back to the window, waiting not for danger, but for justice. The sun hadn't risen yet when Jonathan woke to the sound of movement, not inside the apartment, outside, downstairs. The rhythmic sound of tires on gravel, followed by a low engine hum that didn't belong to any of the residents. He pulled back the curtain slowly and saw it, a dark SUV idling across. The street, windows tinted, the same one he'd seen 3 nights ago near the building's entrance. He stepped back and called Miriam. "They're here again." Her voice was tense. "Then it's time." "For what?" "To put everything on the table. They're not backing off, so we won't either." Jonathan hung up and walked to Zoe's room. She was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, her shoes on. She didn't say a word, just stood, nodded, and grabbed her coat. They didn't need to discuss it anymore. They were moving. They exited the building through the service stairwell. Jonathan had memorized the blind spots in the surveillance cameras just in case. Zoe moved like she'd done this before. No panic, no hesitation. They made it to his car, parked 2 blocks away. He checked under the tires and the hood. Standard protocol now. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "To get justice," he said. "The kind they can't erase." Their destination was a community center downtown that was hosting a press conference. Several former Crane employees had decided to come forward. One of them had been Maya's supervisor. Another had processed the NDAs, and the most recent voice to join them was Selena Moore, the woman Maya had tried to save. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about a culture built on silence. Halfway there, they were followed. A black sedan this time, unmarked. It stayed 4 car lengths behind. Jonathan turned left. The car turned. He accelerated. It followed. Zoe saw it too. "It's them." Jonathan didn't answer. He took a sharp right and pulled into a parking garage. They ducked down, waited, then exited on foot through the side ramp. "They know where we're going," Zoe said. "Then let them," Jonathan replied. "They should hear this too." As they moved through the alley, another figure emerged from a side door. Male, early 40s, earpiece in, eyes locked on Jonathan. "Hey!" the man shouted. "Stop!" Jonathan didn't stop. He grabbed Zoe's hand and ran. The alley narrowed, the sound of boots behind them closing in. They burst into a busy street, weaving through early morning commuters. Horns blared. The man followed for half a block, but then peeled off, speaking into his wrist. "We're out of time," Jonathan said. Zoe pulled a flyer from her pocket. Directions to the event. 2 more blocks. They ran. No plan, no backup, just forward momentum. When they reached the center, press vans were already lining the street. Jonathan's chest heaved. He looked at Zoe, who was breathless, but standing firm. "Ready?" he asked. "Since the day she disappeared," she replied. Inside, the lights were bright and the podium was bare. A few cameras were already rolling. Mia was there, clipboard in hand. "You're late," she said. "We were chased," Jonathan replied. "By who?" "Does it matter?" Zoe said. "We're still here." Mia led them to the front row. The room filled slowly. Journalists, former employees, activists. Then Selena took the stage. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I knew Maya Moore. She tried to warn me, and I ignored her. I survived because she didn't." Jonathan held Zoe's hand as the stories unfolded, one after another. Names, dates, abuse, cover-ups, every voice louder than the last. And when the cameras turned to Jonathan, he stepped forward. "I am Jonathan Crane," he began, "and I am the son of the man who helped build this empire, an empire that silenced women, that erased Maya, that left this girl," he pointed to Zoe, "to raise herself in the shadow of our lies. Today, that ends." The room fell silent, not out of shock, but gravity, the kind that precedes real change. Then came the moment no one expected. Derek walked in. Alone. No lawyers, no press manager, just him. He approached the stage, slow and deliberate. Zoe tensed. Jonathan stepped forward, ready. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Derek raised his hand. "You're right, but I am." Derek took the microphone. "I tried to protect something that didn't deserve protection. I thought silence was loyalty. I was wrong." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "We erased her," Derek continued, "and others. I can't undo it, but I can confirm it. Every word you've heard is true." Zoe's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because she couldn't let herself feel it yet. Not until it was safe, not until it was real. Derek stepped down, handed Jonathan a small box. "Maya's locket," he said. "She left it behind. I kept it. I shouldn't have." After the conference, everything moved fast. The story broke nationally. Investigations launched. Crane Automotive shares plummeted. Lawsuits piled in. And for the first time, Maya's name appeared on headlines that didn't shame her, but honored her. Zoe watched it all from the apartment window. "She finally spoke," she said. "Through us." Jonathan stood beside her. "You did that." "We did." That night, Zoe wore the locket. Inside was a picture of her mother, smiling, and opposite it, an ultrasound photo. Her, before the world tried to erase her. Now, finally, it remembered. The fall of the Crane name was louder than Jonathan had expected. Within 72 hours of the press conference, news outlets across the country ran headlines that connected the wealth of Crane Automotive not to innovation or legacy, but to silence, exploitation, and systemic erasure. Stocks fell. Contracts were pulled. Board members resigned. And with every blow, Jonathan felt something both terrifying and liberating: freedom. He hadn't just destroyed a company, he had severed himself from a lie that began long before Maya disappeared, a lie that told men like him they could do anything as long as they smiled in suits and signed checks. That lie was gone now. In its place, something raw, broken, and real. He visited his father's grave the following morning, alone. No security, no driver, just him, the wind, and the weight of what couldn't be undone. "I followed your footsteps," Jonathan said out loud, "until I saw where they ended." He laid a single wrench on the stone, a symbol Maya would have appreciated more than flowers. "You taught us to build, but not to care who we hurt with what we made." His voice cracked. "That ends with me." He didn't stay long. There was nothing more the dead could say, and nothing more he needed to hear. Redemption didn't live in cemeteries, it lived in the living, and one of them was waiting for him at home. Zoe had started talking more, not about the past, that still lived in her shoulders and the pauses between her sentences, but about what came next. "I don't want revenge," she told him one night while they ate microwaved pasta in silence. "I want purpose. I want to matter for something other than what they did to her." Jonathan nodded. "Then you will." "How?" she asked. "By deciding who you are," he said. "Not who they tried to make you." She didn't respond right away, but a few days later she registered for school. Not because he asked, because she was ready. That was her power, her choice. They kept the apartment, even though he could afford more. Zoe liked the view, said it helped her remember that the world was bigger than the rooms people tried to trap her in. She fixed things, radios, old bikes. Once, a toaster someone left in the hallway with a note that read, "If anyone can save this, it's you." She laughed when she read it. It was the first real laugh he had heard from her, and he would remember the sound forever. There was oil under her nails again, but now it wasn't survival, it was creation. Weeks later, a letter arrived in Jonathan's name. handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Maya, pregnant, standing outside a small shop. On the back, she was never afraid to get dirty, only afraid of disappearing. It wasn't signed, but Jonathan didn't need a signature. He knew who had sent it. Someone who had seen her, even in the final days. Someone who had carried a piece of her truth in silence, and now, finally, gave it back. He placed the photo on Zoe's desk. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "She never gave up, did she?" "Not once," he said, "even when no one was listening." That weekend they drove, not far, just outside the city, along the same stretch of highway where they had first met. The Mustang was still running, though the engine groaned in the heat. Zoe insisted on checking the belts before they left. "You're not breaking down on my watch again," she joked. When they reached the overlook, they parked, sat on the hood, watched the desert breathe. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled something from his pocket. Maya's ring. He had carried it for weeks, unsure of when the moment would come. "It's yours," he said. "She would have wanted you to have it." Zoe stared at the silver, then slid it onto her middle finger. It fit, almost perfectly. "You know," she said quietly, "for a long time I thought the world would never remember her name." Jonathan turned to her. "Now they won't forget." "And mine?" she asked. He smiled. "Yours is just getting started." They stayed like that a long time. The sun burned orange behind the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, an engine rumbled down a forgotten road. Zoe leaned back, hands behind her head. "We're not done, are we?" she asked. "No," Jonathan replied. "We're just not lost anymore." The wind picked up, brushing through her curls, carrying dust and sun and memory. She closed her eyes. He watched her. This girl who had saved his life without knowing, not by fixing his car, but by making him remember who he was before the silence, before the suits, before the fear. And as they sat there side by side, he thought only one thing. She was never supposed to be found, but she was never meant to disappear. Hi, I'm Erlen, and this is Emotional Journey. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment telling us what part hit you the hardest, and don't forget to like and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because stories like this aren't just watched, they're remembered.